Hey guys, it's Sasha from Maker's Loft with yet another fun crafting project. Now, if you've ordered one of our Maker's boxes with our felting kit in it, our wet felting kit, then you would have received in that box a few items to start off with. Now, you would have received a sponge and a little piece of soap in a plastic bag. And what you need to provide is some sharp scissors with a pointy tip, and you need a bowl of water, and you will need to provide a towel to dry your hands. And then you would have received a piece of sort of tulle-like fabric. It's a synthetic sort of sheer curtain fabric, and I'll explain to you in a minute why this type of fabric. You would have received a sushi mat, which we use underneath due to its texture, and you would have probably received a piece of plastic, or if not provided, then we just suggest you work on a table or bench surface that is safe to get wet, because it is going to get wet. And then you would have received a mold, like a template made of yoga mat. I just cut these out whichever shape I'd like to work in. And then obviously you would have received the wool. At this stage it's called roving when it's looking like this, and some coloured wool so that you can create some design on there. So let's get started. Now I'm going to explain things along the way. The reason why we choose our sort of this type of synthetic fabric is because realistically any man-made fibre, which is like a synthetic, you can't felt. It won't attach itself to the wool, whereas any natural fibre like a cotton or a silk, you can actually felt into the wool and it will attach itself. This is because of the way the fibres are made up. So the natural fibres have got little scales that will sort of interlock, and that's really what the process of the felting is. It's the scales on the shaft of the fibre locking together like Velcro, and as you vigorously agitate the fibres, they lock together tighter and tighter. It's like shrinking a jumper in the washing machine or the dryer. Those fibres will lock in together, and no matter how hard you try, you can never get your jumper back into the shape that you had it initially. So that's sort of what we're doing with the fibres of the wool today. So this is why we're using this particular fabric to felt inside of. Basically it's going to protect us from the wool sticking to our hands. So every time we're touching the wool, we're putting the fabric in between so that it doesn't get stuck to our hands. Now the template is going to decide the shape of our design. So we're going to make a little bowl today, and then cut out this out of the center, and you'll see it all come together. Now here's a little example of a bowl that I made previously. In fact, I've got a few different designs here. I've got one with dots. This one's very random in its colouring, and then we've got one here that I've put a little plant in. It's got a bowl in there just to stop the water from seeping through, because obviously it's fabric, so it won't hold the water, but it's a cute way of, sorry, the plant is not looking the best, but it's a cute way of using the bowl. Now what I wanted to explain is that we're basically going to create the design inside out. So the dots or the sort of the different colours, we're actually building around the template first, and if you can imagine that this template would have at some point sat inside. Now because it's shrunk so much it won't fit anymore, but basically we built it around the template like this, and then we cut a hole in it and pulled this out of the center. But it will all make sense very soon as I'm going to make it. So we're going to start off with the design first. Now the reason why we do this on top of the foam mat is the little bubbles on the foam mat will do the felting from the inside, but it won't be as vigorous as our fingers, so the likelihood of it moving around is smaller. So if we put the design first, we'll get a better result. So what we're going to start off with doing is we're going to just get a little bit of water on our sponge, and we're just going to wet our initial side of the template so that the wool will stick to it. So as we're putting the design down, I also will put a little bit of soap on there because it makes it sticky. So now I'm going to just do a random design because it's the quickest way to do it, and I don't want you guys to have to sit and watch me make little circles, but I will make one just to show you how to do it. Now you'll notice how thin, you can probably barely see these little tufts of wool. It's super thin, and it's meant to be that thin. That will come through sort of in that type of colouring, so it will actually show up more than you think, but just against the grey background it's not very obvious. Now if you were wanting to do dots, the trick is to do it, create a disc more than a three-dimensional, sort of make a flat disc. And so I grab a tiny little tuft, and then I put that in between my fingers quite flat, and then I just turn the rest of the fibres, little hairs, around itself like a snail. So if I'm making a dot, I would do it this way, and if you can see, it's reasonably flat. I don't want it to be like a ball. I need it to be a flat sort of disc. The reason being, so that's one way of doing it, the reason being that we need the layers of fibre that will follow after this, they need to be able to find their way through these dots so that they can attach themselves to the next layer. Otherwise you'll just find if your dot is too three-dimensional and too fat and thick and too dense, it won't attach itself and it'll just end up dropping off. So I'm just going to do another little bit of random colouring on this side, a few little stray tufts like that. And then we're going to do our first layer of white, which is going to be the background colour like the other bowls. So white is going to be your main colour. So we're going to lay that out. Now the trick here is to do, so we're going to do approximately 3 layers on each side. And the trick is to go nice and thin, get an even coverage, so try not to have any patches where it's a lot thinner and then thicker in other areas. So we're trying to get even coverage, and we're going to keep it nice and thin so that all the fibres can interlock. So you can see that you can easily sort of see through that, so that's how thin it is. And I'm going to radiate it out from the centre so that it's easiest to sort of get an even coverage. That way I can see where I've been. So it's sort of like a sun. I radiate it out from the centre, and I might just do a little bit there to patch that up. Now if it turns out that your centre is a little bit thin, then you can just put one little bit of wool in the middle there. You can see that I'm overlapping around the outside by probably more than 2 centimetres, so maybe even 3 centimetres. That's because I'm going to tuck it around the other side after I'm done with this side, so you need to overlap it slightly. And the other tip that I've got is don't hold your wool too close and too tight, because you're actually trying to slide the fibres out from the wool. And if you can imagine that a sheep, when it was shorn, its wool might have been approximately that long. So if you hold your wool closer than that and pull on it, you're actually going to be trying to break your wool, and wool is very hard to break, it's very tough. So hold your hand a bit further down and then just let the fibres slide out. And I try and keep it fanned out. So rather than holding it clumped together, I try and keep it sort of separated so that we can get a nice flat surface rather than trying to get a clump like that and pulling it out, which is actually very hard to do. But if I do, you're going to end up with something really thick like that, and then you're going to end up having to fan it out anyway. So we want to be able to see through it and keep it really fanned out like that. So I probably don't need that so much for this layer. This is probably a nice thickness for this layer, so I'm just going to leave that off to the side. Anyway, so we started off with half of the fabric underneath, just over there, and then we're going to now fold the other half of the fabric over the top. So I've basically got half of the fabric under and then the rest is flipped over. You guys may have gotten a different color fabric. I just used the red so that you're able to see it on camera, because when I use white it's very hard to see. So what we're going to do now is we're going to dip our sponge in the water, and we're going to press the water quite hard through to the foam, that yoga mat template. So we want the wool to get quite wet. Now we don't want to overuse the water. We don't want it dripping off the table, although I've just done a few dips, which is probably good for that first layer, but soon you won't need so much. The other thing that helps is just rubbing a little bit of the soap on, because it helps the water penetrate because of the synthetic fabric, and then also a bit of oil still on the wool. The water doesn't absorb very well, whereas the moment you add a little bit of soap in there, it will absorb more easily. So I just hold my fabric down and just rub a little bit of soap on there, and then we'll try again. And now I wet the wool all the way around the outside where the overlap was as well. I want all the wool to get wet. And I don't re-dip very much now. It's more so that I just press the water in that I've already got in my sponge. And you can see the suds. The whole idea is that we want everything to be as sudsy as possible, but not necessarily dripping with water. So there is no such thing as too much soap, but there is such a thing as too much water. Too much water will stop the felting process. It'll be like a sponge and things won't be able to felt very well. Next step is I put one hand on top and one hand underneath the fabric so that we can flip that around, and we now get to see the other side of the foam mat. And I just fold the fabric open, and we're now going to tuck the wool from the other side in over the top of this side of the mat. Now I'm making a bit of a mistake here. I'm actually just going to fold it open again, because we still need to do our design, and I almost forgot that. So I'm going to just wet this side of the foam a little bit, and this is where I might want to dry my hands to be able to handle the wool without it sticking too much. So I'm just going to grab my little bits of wool and create a little bit of a design on this side. And then we might do a little bit of blue, turquoise. There we go. And then we'll fold that over. So just over the top of the design. And then after you've pushed that down, now this first layer is always the most difficult because the wool doesn't like sticking to the foam, so you just sort of have to help it stay down a little bit, that first layer. And then we'll just keep on going around the circle, just pressing the wool down, and then I just help it stay down with my fingers. Now the tighter you can wrap your wool around the template in this first layer, and also following layers, but this first layer, the easier it will be to get that nice round shape of the bowl. It will shrink around it, but it just means it needs to do less shrinking if you can get that shape right from the start. So that's where it helps to just pull that fabric around tightly from the beginning. And then that last little bit. Now you've probably noticed I haven't actually dipped it in water again, because I'm just trying to use what's in there so that I don't overuse the water. Okay, I'm just going to dry my hands a little bit again, and we're ready now for our next white layer. So I'm going to use that bit that I was fanning out earlier, and just place that radiating out from the center. That way I can sort of see where I've been and what areas are covered well. We'll get some more. Now don't feel like you need to use all the wool that we've supplied. I've actually oversupplied, and you may like to make something else out of it afterwards. I actually like to give you a little bit more, because it will allow you to have one practice go while following this tutorial, and then hopefully there's a little bit left for you to have another go, because it's typically one of those projects that once you've done it once and you understand the process, you'll actually find it much easier the second time round, as I guess with a lot of things. Okay, we're going to fold the fabric over again, over the top, and we're going to get the sponge, dip it in the water, and press down through the wool. And again, I'm going to add a little bit of soap on this side so that the water will penetrate through. Now the whole idea with this sponging is that, and adding the water, is that you add enough for the wool to have no bounce in it anymore, so it won't be fluffy anymore. All of it's been wet, so just press hard on it so that the water will go right through, and all of the wool will be wet, so even down to the bottom layer. We don't want any fluffiness anymore. Okay, so I think that's gotten a nice press, and all the way to the outer edges, so all the overlapping parts, because that's what needs to tuck around the other side, and it needs to be sticky. So we're going to again put one hand on the top and one hand on the bottom, and I flip it around like a pancake, and we open that side of the fabric up, and then we start tucking this side over. Now you'll notice that this side is way easier. In fact, I'm just going to sort of rub it with my hand, and it will probably just stay stuck down without too much help. It's because the wool will much more easily stick to itself than it did to that initial foam mat on the other side. So I'll just pull the fabric around to be able to get a nice tight tuck around the circle. Now at this point I'm doing minimal handling of the wool, so I don't over rub it or anything, because we don't want it to felt yet, and the vigorous rubbing is what is the felting process, and we don't want it to felt, because once it starts felting, it's very hard for the next layer to intertwine into the fibres. So we're just doing minimal sort of rubbing. You just give it a stroke to stick it down, and then just leave it. And we're going to do our next layer. So basically we're now on layer number 2 on this side, as in this next layer is going to now the reason why I like to do several layers, because it's much easier to get an even coverage when you do lots of thin layers than it is when you do one thick layer, because if you happen to have a thinner section and you only do one thick layer, it's harder to notice, whereas when you do several thin layers, it's more likely that if you missed an area, then you'll get it on the next layer. So do it nice and thin. As you can see around the outside, you can see through it. So it's a very thin layer, but having 3 of those layers, it will create enough thickness to still be a nice solid bowl. So again, we're going to press our sponge on here, and I might soon fast forward through a couple of these steps, because basically we're now going to repeat steps 1 and 2. So we don't need to do any more colour because the design is there, which is around the foam mat, and in between you don't need to do any more designs. Something you can do if you were wanting to mark your initial side that you started on, so say for example you did a design on that side and you want to be able to keep track of where that design, the side that design was on, what I do is I just put a tiny little bit of colour on that side, and then on the next layer on that same side I put colour again, so that you can keep track of that side, and then in the end where you do lots of moving around, you can keep track of which side you're on. So we're going to fold that open again, and we're now going to tuck that around on that side. So we've just flipped it. And we're going to tuck that layer around this side. Sorry, some of those fibres are sticking. It's not sticking very well. You just have to help it along a little bit. Okay, now dry your hands again, and we're going to do another layer of white on this side. So this is now layer number 2 on this side. You can tell that it's real wool because it's got little bits of grass in it. Although it has been bleached, this white, it does have some bits of grass. We're going to fold the fabric around again, wet our sponge again, and just press through. Now I might just add some more soap, just because it helps penetrate helps the water penetrate through. I'm just going to press it, and we're going to flip it again. So one hand one side, one hand on the other side, and tuck that over. I'll just rub it. Hopefully that will help it stay. Sometimes adding a little bit more soap helps. It's the soap that makes it sticky. So if you're finding that it's not sort of sticking down well, you can add some soap, but you can also just help it along with your hands. Just sort of push it down, or give it another press with the sponge. That will help. Okay, that's that layer. So dry hands again, we're going to add another, this is going to be the last layer of white for this side. And then after I've added this layer of white, I'll just mark it again with the pink, because at the moment I'm going to hide it. But if we just want to keep track of which side we're working on, which if you've done a specific design on that side, you might like to. It will sort of decide which side you're going to cut the hole. So that's my layer of wool there, and then I'll just put another little bit of pink on top just to keep track of that side. I'm going to fold the fabric over again, dip the sponge, press the water, just adding a little bit of soap to help the water get through. There, flip it over again and open the fabric up. There we go. And then tucking the wool over the edges. There. Just have to help those fibres stay down on that one. They're not wanting to. And there. Now we're on our last layer of white here. So then we've got 3 on one side and 3 on the other side. So I'll just dry my hands again so I can handle the dry wool without it being too sticky. And I'm just going to radiate that last layer out like this. And then after this layer, it's time for the actual felting process. So we'll just wet that last layer with our sponge. A little bit of soap, because there's just no such thing as too much soap. I like it very sudsy. Okay, so we've got 3 layers on both sides, and I'm now going to do my last flip. So one hand on top, one under, and flip it over. And then you can tell by the pink that we're back on that that very first side that we were working on. So if you think back to those dots I did, that would be on this side, because that's the side I marked. So yeah, if you were doing a specific design on one side, then you can mark it with a little piece of pink. That pink part, or whatever colour you make it, will only be on the inside of the bowl. So it's not like you're going to see that on the outside. And then after this, we're going to start felting. So far we haven't done any felting yet. We've just been pressing the wool down so that it will stick. And then the felting process is a lot more vigorous. So we actually more so. We get a lot more soap and suds and make it really slippery. And then we're going to vigorously rub the wool. I'm going to make it a little bit wetter for this next part, so I'm just going to get some more. Yours might be quite wet, so just check it. Basically, the way I check it is if you're holding up your disc and it's dripping water underneath, then it's too wet. And in a case like that, I just hold it above the bowl and just give it a little squeeze out. You can see that there's a bit of water coming out. But yeah, if it's sort of running off, then it's a little bit too wet. But what we do need is loads and loads of soap. So just rub a lot of soap on there. And just do both sides. And what I generally do at this point is I just, without handling it too much, I just take that disc out and just place it in the center of my fabric rather than off to one side the way I had it before. And then I fold it tightly, the fabric tightly around one edge, and I start rubbing it. Now I've sort of put my 4 fingers on one side and the palm of my hand on the other side, and I start rubbing around the circle. And you can be quite vigorous with it. As long as there's fabric over the top of the wool, it shouldn't do too much moving, especially if you've got it nice and tight around it. Now we need to go around the circle several times. We're now felting around the outside, and that is to create the shape. So we're starting around the edge of the circle, so to define that circle shape. If we were to start in the center and start felting there, it's more likely to splay out and sort of go off the edges a little bit, and then it's very hard to get it back into shape. So go around your circle first. You can sort of put your hand on it and hold it down on the table and rub the edges. And just turn it as you're going and just move the fabric along with it so that you've got your piece of fabric both at the back and the front. So wherever you're rubbing, you're kneading your fabric over the top, especially at this stage. That you can take the fabric off later once you've sort of got it felted, but at the moment it's very important that the fabric stays over the top of all the parts that you're touching it, because the fibres, the wool is still too likely to move around. So I'll just put it over the top. Now you can see how many suds I've got, so it's really important that it's slippery, that it's very soapy and slippery. So if your hand is not sliding around on there easily and it's too dry or just too watery but without the soap, then just add lots of soap. This is always a bit of a workout. You'll notice it in your arms. I'll probably do a little bit of fast forwarding here so that you don't have to watch all of it. Mind you, you're going to be doing exactly the same at this time. So now all this time you've probably been wondering why the sushi mat. Now the sushi mat, because of the texture, it's like I call it like a mini washboard. The texture of the bamboo is does the felting, some of the felting for you. So basically, if you're holding that down and you're rubbing those edges, the texture of the bamboo is sort of rubbing the bottom, so it's already doing a little bit of the work for you. So and it just stops the water from running. The edges. Now very soon, I've probably gone around maybe twice now, very soon you can have a look at yours, and I do squeeze a little bit, so don't be too gentle. If you're too gentle, it's not going to do much felting. So I do squeeze it and rub it at the same time. So don't be gentle on it. You do need to, because the felting needs to happen right through to the foam template on the inside. So if you're too gentle, it's not going to be felting on the inside. It will only just do the very top layer. So squeeze it and rub it at the same time. The more vigorous you are, the more it will felt. Just think of the sort of what happens inside a washing machine when your woolen jumper is shrinking. It's the movement in there. More so than it is also the hot water, but it's the movement with the hot water that it's making it felt. And that's why they always say to leave a jumper to dry just lying down, because it's actually the vigorous movement in there that does the felting, which is really like what's happening to a woolen jumper in the washing machine. It's getting felted and it's being shrunk tighter. That's why all the fibres always look more dense when it comes out after it's been shrunk. So just imagine we're shrinking a woolen jumper around a round template. Okay, now we should by now have a nice round shape. So those fibres are sort of quite nicely felted around the edges now. They're not lifting off. So we're now going to concentrate on the two centres. Now again, I'm going to cover it with the fabric so that we're not rubbing it straight on the wool. And the bottom is here going to play a big part as well. So I'm just going to do lots of vigorous rubbing in the centre, sort of massaging. And then sometimes I'll just centre it a little bit better. I just sort of gather my fabric at the top, so I've got something to hold on to. And then you can actually just sort of do little circles and rotate that over the top of the sushi mat so that that side is felting. And then you just flip it over and do a little bit more on the other side. Now you can see there's lots of suds there, but it's not like there's water running off the table or anything, so it's definitely more soapy than it is wet. And we'll turn it over one more time. Try and sort of give both sides as much attention as each other so that it felts evenly. Okay, now this is where I do a pinch test. So basically we know that it's felted if you can go like this and the layer of wool is not lifting up. I know that there's a few hairs lifting off there, but it's not ready if you can actually still grab a whole layer of wool. But it's not really separating, which means that it's all intertwined and it's felted together. And we'll just check the other side. Now, if you do still have a layer lifting up, then just continue felting and just be more vigorous. Very often the reason why it hasn't felted well yet is because you've been too gentle. So just make sure that that you're quite vigorous in your felting. Don't be worried that it's going to separate, because with the fabric over the top it won't, or it shouldn't. So yeah, with the fabric over the top, make sure that you're quite vigorous. Now if you are ready, and it is at this stage and it's all felted, so I can sort of grab all those parts and it's sort of become a piece of fabric, like it's not separating anymore. Now because we know that the side that we had the dots on is this side where I put the pink, we might keep the dots, because when we cut out our circle, and I had the dots sort of a little bit in the centre, we may be cutting the dots away. So I'm actually going to cut this side, and I'm just going to cut a circle approximately the size of a 50-cent coin. So quite small, because it's going to stretch. And this is why I need you to get some sort of sharp scissors, because it's that first cut that's the most difficult. So you sort of need to get right in where the foam is. I don't know if you can see that, but basically you can see the grey of the foam there. And I'm now just going to cut a circle. There we go. You can see that design from the inside. And then the next step is we're going to just slide, say, 2 or 3 fingers in through the hole, just in between the fabric, like the wool and the template. And we're going to seal this edge, because wherever you cut, it's got a tendency to separate and sort of fray out. So we need to felt this edge so that it doesn't separate. And I do this by just rubbing the edge like that. So I sort of, with my finger in there, or fingers in there, I just go back and forth or sideways, and basically I'm just felting those cut edges. And then I just move it around. Now you can see that the hole has gotten slightly bigger just from me just rubbing that out a little bit. If you need it soapier. Mine's sort of drying out a little bit, so it's not as slippery. So just add some more soap. Just felts better with the soap. The suds help the scales of the fibres open up a little bit, and that needs to happen for them all to lock together. So you can see it's getting a little bit bigger, that hole, not much, but a little bit bigger. And the size of this is totally up to you. I just keep it reasonably small. I'm going to, in a minute, get my whole fist into there. So it's going to go a little bit bigger still. So I don't like cutting it too big straight off, because it's just going to expand more. Now with that sealed, I don't know if you can see, but that's sort of nice and sealed together. It's not sort of separating, the fibres are not separating anymore. So now it's safe to get your template from the inside. So now I just grab one of the edges, and just don't have to be gentle. You can just pull that out. So that's now you can reuse it or discard it. Now I'm going to create a fist, and the ridge where the fold was, I'm going to put the rounded side of my knuckles in just at that spot, because we're trying to now smooth out where the fold was. So I basically rub my other hand over the top of my fist to create a rounded shape where the fold was, to turn it into more of a bowl shape. Now again, don't be gentle, just put a bit of pressure in between your hand and your fist so that you're actually rubbing it quite hard. Now at this point, your bowl is not going to fall apart anymore. it's all been felted together, and it's quite strong. Nothing much is going to happen, so you don't have to be gentle. As you can see, I'm just moving my way around the bowl with my fist so that all the edges are getting the same amount of work. You will get slight sort of creasing, I guess. It's just part of what happens as it's shrinking. So we can pull that out to a certain extent when we're after rinsing it. Now what I want to show you in just a moment is how much it's already shrunk. So if we were to try and get this back into there, if you lay this on top, you can see that it's already shrunk so much that it's basically the template wouldn't really fit inside there anymore. So as we're felting, you're shrinking it as well, which makes the fabric denser as the fibres lock together. So all this rubbing is shrinking it. Okay, now I think this side is felted well enough, so now it's time for the big reveal of your design, and we're going to turn it. I was going to say inside out, but it's actually the right way around. So you can't see that well because of the suds, but basically we're now going to rub that side. Now this is where you hope that your dots in your design have all attached themselves well. If you're finding that they're coming loose off the white background, it would be due to one of two reasons. One could be that you didn't felt it hard enough, so the felting process wasn't happening all the way through. Or it could be that your pieces that you were attaching were too thick and that the white wool fibres couldn't sort of find their way through your attached pieces to felt them together. You can see how many suds I've got, so that's really important. It's part of the process. Okay, so at this point, I'm quite happy with how felted it is. It's shrunk a fair bit, you can see, when you lay it back on top of the template. So it's time to rinse out all the suds now, and you can sort of get a good look at your design. If for any reason you're not happy with how felted it is, because it does tend to go a little bit fluffy again once you rinse it, if you want to felt it more, all you need to do is just keep it wet and just add soap again and just felt it more. So you can actually, you know, do more felting. So let me just give this a quick rinse out, and I'll come back and show you what it looks like. You can rinse it in sort of warmish water, or you can actually just do it in cold water because it doesn't make that much of a difference. So one moment and I'll be back. Okay, so this is the bowl rinsed. You can see that it's slightly fluffy again, which is sort of the nature of it anyway because it's wool after all. And yeah, this is your finished bowl. I can see, I don't know if you can see through there, but mine is just slightly thinner there. I may have, maybe I should have put a little bit extra on there in the center when I was felting around. But it doesn't have any holes, and it's generally not a bad looking bowl. So what you can do is stretch the sides out a bit if you're worried about the creases that are in there. So you can sort of give that a little pull out. And basically how you leave it sitting overnight is the shape it will take on. So if I just leave it sitting like this as a bowl overnight, then that's the way it will stay shaped. If you sort of give it a pull and have it sitting sideways like that, then that's pretty much the way it's going to dry and be shaped. So yeah, totally up to you. You can get your little plant, put your plant in there, something along those lines. Great little bowl to put your keys on near the front door, and it's sculptural. So it's a sculpture made from wool. I hope you enjoyed the class. Thank you for joining. Bye.